Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for being here. We do have a really great show for you tonight. We've got a lot to cover, most of it fascinating stuff that is coming out in even the mainstream media about AIPAC, some exposés that was done on MSNBC that we want to show you that is just like shocking that MSNBC actually did an entire expose on AIPAC. People used to be too afraid to do that. Fox News also did an incredible breakdown years ago that was subsequently pulled from their website. There was a 4-part series where they dove into the Israelis spying on the United States and perhaps implicating them in 9/11. There's also new evidence that shows the Saudi Arabian government was implicated in 9/11, even though we went off and invaded Iraq. So we're going to talk about all of that tonight. Also an update from the doctors that have been trapped in Gaza that Ryan Grimm from The Intercept has been doing some really great reporting on. We do want to give you an update and read the scathing letter from the doctor who has been trapped in Gaza. The doctor who saved Tammy Duckworth's life, Senator Tammy Duckworth's life, he's there. He wrote a scathing letter. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start off with this new piece that came out in The Atlantic titled New 9/11 Evidence Points to Deep State Saudi Complicity. They write 2 decades of U.S. policy appear to be rooted in a mistaken understanding of what happened that day. It's interesting, first of all, a couple of points on this that's interesting. And then I'm going to play for you a really fascinating Fox News video about Israel and spying and their complicity in 9/11. What's interesting about this Atlantic piece is, number one, the timing of this piece coming out. Interesting that now this piece comes out implicating Saudi Arabian government right when the United States is really trying to get a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. They really want to normalize. And so this is kind of interesting timing. And it kind of then leads to the question of, is this a limited hangout of some way? You know, they're going to give us all of this stuff saying Saudi Arabian government was complicit in 9/11. Look at all the things Saudi Arabia did. And then not give us the full everything. To really, that tells us the whole truth that maybe there were other players involved, which is why that Fox News video we're going to play for you is so interesting, because it does also imply that Israel was heavily involved, or at least knew about it for sure. So the timing of this is interesting, and it does feel like a limited hangout. If you're not familiar with that term, that means that, once the deep state, the spy masters, when their cover story or the mainstream crap that they spew out to us is no longer being bought by the public at large, which at the time after 9/11, the public did largely buy that somehow a plane full of Saudi Arabian nationals, somehow the blame falls on Iraq, right? It was a leap. People didn't seem to ask a lot of questions at that time. There were some that did, but by and large, the voice of the majority was, go get him, go get him. And I guess we got to go get Saddam Hussein in Iraq for 9/11. That was just the basics of that story, was that we knew that there were a bunch of Saudi nationals on it. So how could it be Iraq's fault? But people bought that because of weapons of mass destruction that there was no evidence for. And so when that cover story started to erode, which is what's happened over the years, people have, now that the shock and horror has worn off. I was in college when 9/11 happened. I remember that day very clearly. I know many of you do, where I woke up. I was on the West Coast, woke up, turned on the news, and saw plumes of smoke on television, which was the buildings collapsing and people running and not understanding what was happening, looking at the screen, what is going on. It was shock and horror. I called my family, what is happening? And called friends, talked to people. Everybody said, we're under attack. We're under attack. It was obviously, for those of us who were really old enough or around for it, it was a shocking time in our history. And there was a lot of panic. So in that panic, the intelligence sector of the United States was able to, and the military industrial complex was able to capitalize on that and say, well, then we're going to connect these dots together. Saudi Arabia, planes full of Saudi Arabian nationals, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction, right? People bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Well, that now is worn off because the shock is worn off. So people are now saying, yeah, but it was a plane full of Saudis. And yeah, but there were the dancing Israelis. There were all of these questions about these Israeli nationals, and they seem to know stuff. what did George Bush really know? People start questioning more, and it's now become okay to question. A younger generation, they were too young to be really shocked during 9/11, or they maybe weren't even born at that time, and now they're old enough to say, "What the heck? What's this story that you guys have been fed?" So the limited hangout is once people no longer buy the official narrative and people become suspicious, then the spy masters will hang out a little bit of information to satisfy us. They'll either do it, they'll plant the evidence out there for someone to discover and stumble on, or they'll release the evidence. But a lot of times now what they do is they pass it off to journalists and they say, you cover this story, we got some juicy information. And then the journalists will cover the story, and they're holding back the real information. They're giving you just enough to satisfy your curiosity, and that's a limited hangout. So the question is this a limited hangout? Are we being fed now some new evidence that Saudi Arabian government knew something about 9/11 and they were even complicit in it? They maybe might have been involved and they did nothing about it, but we're not being given the whole story. Is it true information that the government is covered up because they've been in bed with Saudi Arabia for a long time? We sell a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia. We rely on Saudi Arabia for oil. We rely on Saudi Arabia to prop up the US dollar to make sure that oil is traded in dollars exclusively, primarily, which has changed recently. And that could be why now they're willing to hang Saudi Arabia out to dry, saying we covered up your crimes for a while. We kind of turned a blind eye because we needed you, or you were doing it by our request by chance, maybe because we wanted to go to war in Iraq. We wanted to have an excuse to go in under the guise of weapons of mass destruction. We wanted to trick people into a war, maybe, right? So now they're coming out with this, and the question is why. But let's get to this piece a bit from the Atlantic. So let me just read from it here. So for more than 2 decades, through 2 wars and domestic upheaval, the idea that al-Qaeda acted alone on 9/11 has been the basis of U.S. policy. A blue ribbon commission concluded that Osama bin Laden had pioneered a new kind of terrorist group, combining superior technological know-how, extensive resources, and a worldwide network so well coordinated that it could carry out operations of unprecedented magnitude. This vanguard of jihad, it seemed, was the first non-state actor that rivaled nation states in the damage it could wreak. Again, this Osama bin Laden, not even in Iraq, but we're going to go after Iraq and weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein. That assessment now appears wrong. And if our understanding of what transpired on 9/11 turns out to have been flawed, then the costly policies that the United States has pursued for the past quarter century have been rooted in a false premise. A new filing in a lawsuit brought by the families of 9/11 victims against the government of Saudi Arabia alleges that al-Qaeda had significant, indeed decisive state support for its attacks. Officials of the Saudi government, the plaintiff's attorney contend, formed and operated a network inside the United States that provided crucial assistance to the first cohort of 9/11 hijackers to enter the country. So what it is that there's a bunch of the 9/11 victims, the families of those who were killed in 9/11. They have been bringing about lawsuits. They're trying to get some answers, and they have been trying to sue the government of Saudi Arabia. In those lawsuits, there have been discovery. They've been able to go and get documents and a variety of stuff from a variety of places so that they could pin 9/11 on Saudi Arabia. Why only Saudi? Well, Saudi Arabia to me makes sense why the families would go for that, considering the planes were filled with Saudi Arabian nationals. So it makes sense that you would start asking questions of Saudi Arabia. Of course, there are some other questions and other players that we might want to ask questions from, but this is where they're at right now. So now there have been in this discovery process documents that have been uncovered. Goes on to say the 71-page document released in redacted form earlier this month summarizes what the plaintiffs say they've learned through the evidence obtained in discovery and recently declassified materials. They allege that Saudi officials, most notably Fahad al-Thumari, an imam at an Los Angeles mosque, and an accredited diplomat at Saudi Arabia's consulate in that city, and Omar al-Bayoumi, who masqueraded as a graduate student but was identified by the FBI as an intelligence operative, were not rogue operators, but rather the front end of a conspiracy that included the Saudi embassy in Washington and senior government officials in Riyadh. The plaintiffs argue that Thumeri and Buyomi organized safe reception, transportation, and housing for hijackers beginning upon their arrival to, and they named the two hijackers, but I can't pronounce their names, beginning upon their arrival in California on January 15th, 2000. Both Thumeri and Buyomi have denied aiding the plot. Buyomi, along with Saudi Arabia, has also denied that he had any involvement with its intelligence operations. The filing further argues that Thumeri and Buyomi introduced the pair to local sympathizers in Los Angeles and San Diego who catered to their day-to-day needs, including help with immigration matters, digital and phone communications, and receiving funds from al-Qaeda by wire transfer. Saudi officials also helped the two al-Qaeda operatives, both Saudi nationals with little education or command of English, whose experience abroad consisted mostly of training and fighting for jihadist causes, to procure a car as well as a driver's license. This support network was crucial. The filing, responding to a Saudi motion to dismiss the case, which is currently before the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, makes extensive reference to FBI investigative reports, memos, communications records, and contemporaneous evidentiary materials that are still under seal, but are likely to be made public in the coming weeks. So at this point, we're not really getting a lot, right? They're saying that, okay, these two Saudis that one of them was an imam at an LA mosque. One of them was said to be a graduate student, but really we think he's intelligence. They don't really provide evidence of him being intelligent. Saudi Arabia has denied that. They're saying that they connected with two hijackers, and these two helped these two hijackers get cars and get immigration papers and learn English. Okay, but before they were hijackers, they weren't hijackers, right? They were just normal people they were just people. They weren't hijackers yet because 9/11 hadn't happened. So you have to kind of roll back the clock. It's easy to do things in hindsight, but you could roll back the clock and say, well, they weren't hijackers at that time. So if you were helping somebody and you didn't know, you can't see the future, and you have some Saudi nationals show up and you're going to help them out. You say, oh yeah, I'm going to help you get a car. I'm going to help you learn English. I'm going to help you get immigration papers. That doesn't mean that you know what they are going to do. It could mean that you knew exactly what they were going to do and you were there part of the plot helping them out. But it also doesn't, not necessarily. You could have just been helping two people, thinking that you were helping them out, helping them become like you in the country, living there. Maybe they're going to work for you at your mosque, or maybe they're going to work somewhere, go to school or whatever. And then it just so happens that later on they ended up being these bad people. I mean, many of us have helped people and then discovered they were bad people. I mean, that happens, right? So I don't know if that, just because the link is there now in hindsight, I'm not sure if that really means anything. And I'm not really sure what any of this means anyway, because who's Buyomi and Thumeri anyway? I mean, they say, oh, they're kind of connected to the Saudi consulate or the Saudi embassy, and so therefore the Saudi government must have known something. I mean, this just feels a little weak. So it goes on to say, the materials that have already surfaced, however, document the extent of the complicity of Saudi officials. The 9/11 Commission report recounted numerous contacts between Buyomi and Thumeri, but described only circumstantial evidence of Thumeri as a contact for the two hijackers, and stated that it didn't know whether Buyomi's first encounter with the operatives occurred by chance or design. So they don't know anything. But the evidence assembled in the ongoing lawsuit suggests that actions Thumeri and Buyomi took to support the hijackers were actually deliberate, sustained, and carefully coordinated with other Saudi officials. So they're just making these allegations, but they don't have any real evidence for this. Again, leading us to wonder, why is this coming out now? Why are they reporting on this now? This doesn't have anything. There's nothing here, but these reports are coming out. People are talking about it. Is this a way to threaten Saudi Arabia and say, look, you either normalize relations with Israel, you stop this nonsense of wanting the genocide in Gaza to end, or else we're going to come after you, we're going to demonize you, we're going to blame you for 9/11. And you saw what we did to people we blamed for 9/11, even if they didn't do it. In addition to the documents showing financial and logistical support, the evidence includes several videotapes seized by the UK during raids of Buyomi's properties, where he was arrested in Birmingham in September of 2001. One video, a more complete version of a tape reviewed by the 9/11 Commission, shows Midhar and Hazmi, these are the two hijackers, at a welcome party arranged by Buyomi after they moved to San Diego. The full video, the filing claims, shows that the party was organized by Buyomi and Thumeri to introduce the hijackers. Now, again, they didn't know they may or may not have known they were hijackers at the time. to introduce these two people to a carefully curated group of like-minded community members and religious leaders. How do they know? How do they know they were like-minded? The UK police also, they're just saying that. You're like-minded individuals, right? The UK police also found, according to the filing, a notepad on which Bayomi had sketched a drawing of a plane alongside a calculation used to discern the distance at which a target on the ground would be visible from a certain altitude. Now, that is more damning. The guy Bayomi, who's maybe or may not have known who these two guys were, may or may not have been connected, may or may not have been in the plot, may or may not have been like-minded. It is more damning that they found a notepad with a drawing of a plane and a calculation to discern the distance at which a target on the ground would be visible from a certain altitude. But if he was interested in flying and becoming a pilot, and maybe that's what the like-minded interests were with these hijackers was, hey, yeah, we're guys that just like to fly, not realizing some were going to fly some into planes into buildings, then you would be calculating those types of things. You would need to know when you could see runways and whatnot, right? I would think every pilot or anybody training to be a pilot in America is doing these types of drawings and calculations. Another seized video contains footage of Bayomi in Washington, D.C., where he met with Saudi religious officials posted as diplomats at the embassy and visited the U.S. Capitol. In the video, according to the filming, Bayomi carefully films and notes the Capitol's structure features, entrances, and security posts, addressing his narration to his esteemed brothers. The Capitol was the likely fourth target of the 9/11 attacks, the one that was spared when passengers aboard United Flight 93 wrestled with the hijackers and the plane crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Okay, that's also a bit more damning that he was going around surveilling the place. If Thumeri and Bayomi were the front end of the support network for the hijackers, their control officers in the U.S. would have been in Washington at the Saudi embassy. In the pre-9/11 years, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Islamic Affairs had a sizable presence in the embassy as well as at the consulate in Los Angeles. So again, how do you connect Bayomi and Thumeri to the Saudi government? That is where things get even more flimsy. So I get it. I understand. Was Saudi Arabia complicit? Was the government involved? I don't know if the government itself was involved. Certainly, there might have been people who were in the government who were involved, but it wasn't meaning that it was directed by the government. Sure. And, I believe that Saudis absolutely had way more likely to have something to do with 9/11 than Iraq and Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction. And yet that's where we went to war, right? There's way more evidence to point to Saudi Arabia, but were they alone in that? Were they the only ones? That's where things get really interesting. Let me go ahead and play for you this video from Fox News. This was done by Carl Cameron. It was a 4-part investigative series on the Israeli spy ring that was absolutely entrenched in the United States, spying on Americans. This was done on Fox News of all places. And it was a 4-part series that was done in 2001, so December of 2001, maybe even into January of 2002, but right after September 11th. We're just going to play for you one of the parts. This was then pulled from Fox News's website. So this was, many reporters were involved in these investigations. This was vetted. This was well done. This was not crap done by one person. There was a team of people that put this together. And we could assume it was highly factual because of that. And it was then subsequently disappeared from Fox News's website. Why would that be? You'll see, because let's go ahead and play. Let's go ahead and start. Here is, this was again from 2001, Carl Cameron on Fox News. Watch this.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a 4-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Another part of the investigation has resulted in the detention and arrests of dozens of Israelis at American Mall kiosks, where they've been selling toys called Puzzle Car and Zoomcopter. Investigators suspect a front. Shortly after the New York Times and Washington Post reported the Israeli detentions last month, the carts began vanishing. Zoomcopter's webpage says, we are aware of the situation caused by thousands of mall carts being closed at the last minute. This in no way reflects the quality of the toy or its saleability. The problem lies in the operator's business policies. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally.
Wow. Right there. The most aggressive espionage campaign of any U.S. How could you even be an ally if you're operating an aggressive spy campaign in the United States against the United States? And yet here we are today with all of our lawmakers, everything Israel, all things lead to, Israel great. We got to give now veteran money to people that serve in the IDF. We love Israel so much. And they've operated this massive spy campaign. What were they gathering when they were spying? Were they potentially gathering dirt on our elected officials to keep them in their pocket? That's what many of us would like to know.
A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, the Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives.
Now imagine if this was China that we were talking about. Imagine just replace China. Every time you see Israel, replace it with China. Whenever they talk about Israelis that are operating these kiosks, selling cheap toys or posing as art students that are going to sell cheap art. Imagine if we said Chinese workers at these kiosks selling cheap toys, but really they're spying on Americans, or Chinese students posing as students selling cheap art, but they're really spying on America. Imagine if you just flip out the words. If you flipped out the words, Americans would be flipping out. But here we are. We just turn a blind eye. No big deal.
A spokesman for the the Israeli embassy here in Washington issued a categorical denial, saying any suggestion that Israelis are spying in or on the U.S. is, quote, simply not true. There are other things to consider, and in the days ahead, we will take a look at the U.S. phone system and law enforcement's methods for wiretaps.
Well, I have to say, at least they didn't call them anti-Semitic, right? That was the response I thought they would give when they reached out and said, what's going on here? And they said, it's just simply not true. I'm surprised they didn't say, that's anti-Semitic. How dare you even accuse us of
And an
this?
investigation into the possibility that both have been compromised by our friends and allies overseas. Brett?
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected. None of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
Yeah, this going to the fact that they were spying on some Arabs, right?
Correct.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We reported on the approximately 60 Israeli.
So there's that. They knew, they obviously must have known. They were doing a bunch of spying. They were spying on the Arabs. They were also spying on Americans. They maybe knew about the plot for 9/11. Then the question is, if they knew, which according to Fox News of all places, they're saying, how could they not have known? They clearly must have known. If they knew, why did they not say anything? Were they hoping for it to happen? There's the dancing Israelis, right? The images of the Israelis that were surveilling. They looked like I think they said they were movers moving in and out of the building. They were arrested and they were questioned. They were ultimately let go and they were sent back to Israel. But it's a very questionable activity that they were on the roof looking right at the Twin Towers. And then they were celebrating as soon as the Twin Towers were hit. A lot of people question why were they on the roof surveilling when they were supposed to be just movers? What were they doing there? Why were they dancing and celebrating when the Twin Towers were actually hit? That doesn't mean they did it. It doesn't mean that Israel was involved in 9/11. It doesn't also, you can't exclude them. You can't include them necessarily. But there is a lot of questions about how much they knew. And if they knew, why didn't they say anything to their supposed ally? If you knew your friend was going to be attacked and killed, wouldn't you say something if you were really their friend? Why would you not say something for their own gain? You would say something, you would just say nothing for your own, you would just, because you're trying to gain something. That doesn't make you a very good friend now, does it? So that's the big question. How much did they know? Why did they not tell us? Why? And then they clearly weren't just spying, operating this massive spying ring because they wanted to catch these Arabs that were going to do this terrible bad thing to the United States. Otherwise, they would have told the plot and stopped the plot if that's why they were spying on us. They were clearly spying on us for other reasons. They were also spying on these Arabs, but they were spying on us. Why were they allowed to spy on us? Why has this expose been out here for now over 20 years? And rather than our country saying, look, we got to put the kibosh on our relationship. You're your own country. We're our own country. We are separate countries. Rather than actually ending that relationship, they've instead gone on to strengthen that relationship to where we are today, where we can't seem to have very many elected officials who actually could speak up against the state of Israel without there being some severe consequences to their reputation, to their campaigns. That might be changing, though. We're going to be talking about here, we're going to move on here to Thomas Massie and him winning his election here, even though AIPAC threw tons of money trying to stop Thomas Massie. But this is very interesting. We do have the link down below for you to watch the entire video here. We just played 5 minutes of this video. That is about 20 minutes long. So if you're interested in watching the whole thing, I definitely recommend you check it out. Done by Fox News. This wasn't, they can't, what are they going to say? Conspiracy theory, anti-Semitism at Fox News. The question is, why did they not follow up on this, or why did they pull it off of their website? But that link is down below for you guys. Now, there's a lot of people out there who they either got the COVID vaccine, maybe because they were forced to because of their job, or they got COVID themselves and just not quite feeling themselves. That spike protein, that pesky spike protein, we now know that is at the root of so many of the different vaccine side effects, has just caused people so many debilitating issues. Long COVID, they're calling it, even if it's vaccine injuries. Well, fortunately, there's help because Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Harvey Risch, and the chief medical board at the wellness company have formulated an unmatched supplement that may help with all of these issues you might be having. You guys have heard me talk about the Wellness Company and their emergency kits for a while now. This product is one that I honestly believe every American, vaxxed or not, should be taking. Revolutionary over-the-counter spike support formula is the gold standard for combating spike protein. That is the toxic substance we know is just at the root of all these problems. So take this, combat that. The Wellness Company doctors hear from people like you every day saying they've never felt the same since being vaccinated. So what you can do to get back to feeling like you used to is take the Wellness Company's spike support formula. You've got a daily supplement now to help you get back to feeling your best. Reclaim your health by going to twc.health/Kim. Use the code Kim to save 15% off and get free shipping.
So we, hopefully, together will find a way to register our displeasure with the ICC, because if they'll do this to Israel, we're next. This group tried to come after our soldiers. Yeah, you can clap all you want to. They tried to come after our soldiers in Afghanistan, but reason prevailed. So at the end of the day here, what I hope to happen is that we level sanctions against the ICC for this outrage to not only help our friends in Israel, but protect ourselves over time. Mr. Secretary, your statement yesterday was excellent. The president's statement was excellent. Senator Schumer's statement on the floor was excellent about the outrage here. They have destroyed the notion of complementarity. They have misled people in the United States Senate about their intention, and they shall and will pay a price. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate what you've said. It is now time for us to act. Thank you. So
I mean, just unbelievable, right? Unbelievable that here's Lindsey
we'll find
Graham.
a way to register our displeasure with the ICC.
Let me turn
they'll
him
do this
off.
to Israel, we're next.
We don't want to hear his voice anymore, do we? We don't need to be hearing Lindsey Graham anymore. What's interesting about Lindsey Graham, here he is showcasing how bought off he is. But just the absurdity of his argument that he's making there. If the ICC is willing to go after Israel, we're next. You know what? One can hope, Lindsey Graham. One could hope that some of the war criminals in our own government would actually be held accountable for the war crimes that they commit. That would be justice. That would be a democratic society that we pride ourselves on being. We all claim that we are this great democratic society that wouldn't allow crimes like the Nazis to actually perpetuate. But yet here we are covering up war criminals all the time. And because we shame the courts, they're going after the members of the ICC, trying to scaremonger them. How dare they actually go after Israel? What are they thinking? How dare they? How dare they? Clearly bought off by AIPAC, Lindsey Graham has received a lot of money by the pro-Israel lobby. Israel, everybody needs to remember, it is not a nation that is representative of Jewish people. It claims it is, but it's not. It's a foreign Middle Eastern country. That's what it is. And it rides on the backs of the reputation of Jews around the world in order to try to avoid any sort of criticism. That's what Israel does. Israel says, well, if you criticize us, you're criticizing Jews. If you criticize us, then you're anti-Semitic. No, you are a country. You're a nation. You're a government. If I criticize the government of the United States, does that make me anti-American? Am I against American people? There's an entire nation filled with Americans. There's even Americans all around the world. So if I criticize the government of America, does that mean I hate all Americans around the world, all Americans in this country? No, I love Americans. I even love America, but I could still criticize the actions of my government. And yet somehow Israel has been able to completely make that distinction very foggy for people. If you criticize Israel, you're somehow criticizing Jews, even though most Jews don't even live in Israel. They live everywhere other than Israel. That's Israel, I believe, has 1/3 of the world's Jews. And then Israel's so quick to point out that not everybody who's an Israeli is Jewish. So they can't just be a nation of Jews. They also have 2 million Arabs. Don't forget. That's what they constantly point out. But Lindsey Graham clearly very, very bought off by the pro-Israel lobby. Somebody who is not bought off, however, is Thomas Massie. Let me just pull up Thomas Massie. So cool. He actually defeated the AIPAC lobby, which is really awesome. He actually won his primary by kind of a whopping margin. Look at this. This is the big margin of him winning. Look at that, 75% against his challengers, Michael McGinnis and Eric Dieters. Thomas Massey is very much he is pro-America. Thomas Massey is pro-America, pro-freedom. He is pro First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights. He is the green. This is the irony of Thomas Massey. Now, here he is, a Republican libertarian running in Kentucky. Is Kentucky the Bible Belt? I think he's very conservative. I think highly Christian state. And yet he dominates in the election, despite the fact that he has voted against aid to Israel. He's voted against aid to Ukraine. He's voted against any of these policies that are trying to make certain speech anti-Semitic or labeling all of that. He has consistently voted against everything that AIPAC has stood for. In fact, this is them getting mad about it. This is their tweet. As we've said, AIPAC was not playing in Massey's primary. We're shining a spotlight on his atrocities, anti-Israel record, his atrocious anti-Israel record, and making sure every Kentuckian knows that Representative Thomas Massey votes AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar against pro-Israel bills. Yeah, those Kentuckians said, we don't care. We love Thomas Massey. So that just goes to show Americans, even in the most conservative states, the Americans in that red conservative states that are typically supposed to be ultra pro-Israel, this goes to show that those Americans care about America first. It's just that the politicians don't give us the option of anything other than a very hyper pro-Israel, really showcasing a pro-Israel, like Israel first policy almost, by many of these politicians. I haven't seen Lindsey Graham get that fired up about America. He's that fired up about giving money away to foreign countries in wars, but never about America. But this just goes to show Thomas Massey's not a Republican in a blue state. He's not a Republican in an atheist state full of heathens. He's not a Democrat. He is a Republican conservative in a conservative Bible Belt state, and yet he defeated AIPAC. He defeated them handily. That's what he did. And that just goes to show this is a pathway for other politicians. You don't have to kowtow to your lobby, but that's what they do. They kowtow to the lobby. They are not paying attention to the people. They're paying attention to their donors. Their donors happen to be AIPAC. And so the politicians sound like Lindsey Graham, all of them. And you saw him sitting there praising even Schumer, right? Democrats and Republicans unite when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to war, when it comes to supporting other countries, anything other than America. When it comes to America, suddenly they're all divided and they can't get anything done. But when it comes to foreign policy, wars, and other countries, they can get everything done, and they do it in record speed. Here's an advertisement I want to show you from AIPAC. They're celebrating the fact that they got all these wonderful Democratic candidates that they support, and these candidates win. Watch this.
Well, I appreciate the relationship that I've had with AIPAC from the very beginning of my congressional journey.
The pro-Israel community fully embraced me.
AIPAC played a very important role in my political campaign. I think it really helped it take off.
Thank you to everyone and AIPAC for their deep and long-standing friendship. It means a lot to me.
Guys, I mean, this is treason. That's what this is. This is a foreign country. And these politicians are saying, oh, I'm so grateful for the support of this American Israel Political Action Committee. If this were America-China Political Action Committee, people would be absolutely up in arms over it. But AIPAC is touting its own record, saying we have a record. All of our candidates win. Look at this. Our 100% of our AIPAC endorsed Democratic candidates win because they throw a ton of money against those who are pro-humans, not just pro-Jews and pro-Israelis, but pro-humans in general. They throw all their money against those candidates. So they have a 100% record at this point with Democratic candidates. They can't say that about Republicans now, can they, after Thomas Massey? No, they cannot. Thomas Massey just showed them their asses. And that is what every politician in America needs to do. Stop voting just for AIPAC. Vote with your constituents. Your constituents are not going to turn on you when they find out you don't support Israel, you support America. Americans like America, it turns out, more than anything. Americans like America. So that's all you have to do. But all of these politicians that are basically, in my mind, committing absolute treason are doing everything that AIPAC wants. This was really surprising. MSNBC actually blasted AIPAC. They did an entire segment. This was in December that we just have to share with you, from Ali Veshi on MSNBC. The fact that this is airing on a mainstream media outlet is shocking, just like the Fox News one we just showed you. That one airing on Fox News 20 years ago is shocking. That exposes Israel and their spies all on America. This one was equally shocking, exposing AIPAC. This is why AIPAC is going so hard in favor of pro-Israel candidates. Watch this.
The American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It was incorporated in 1963. For 10 years prior to that, it was known as the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. AIPAC calls itself America's pro-Israel lobby, and according to its website, it has over 3 million members across the country in regional chapters working to, quote, expand and strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship, end quote. You may know AIPAC as being one of the biggest and most recognizable donors to many of the members of Congress in your state. But contributing to campaigns is a relatively new function of the organization. Before 2021, AIPAC did not endorse candidates nor give political contributions. Its focus was on lobbying elected officials, not actually electing officials. But in a dramatic shift in policy, AIPAC began directly funding candidates and spending big on races in 2021. AIPAC Political Action Committee, AIPAC-PAC, filed something called a Statement of Organization with the FEC just in time for the 2022 election cycle, where it spent $50 million, including both direct contributions to candidates and outside spending like TV advertisements. According to AIPAC, it donated money to 365 candidates from both parties, including every single member of both Democratic and Republican leadership in Congress. 109 Republicans who voted against the certification of the 2020 presidential election in America received campaign contributions from AIPAC. All in all, AIPAC gave money to 342 members of the 118th Congress. The 2022 elections were the most expensive midterms in American history, with a total cost of $8.9 billion spent. Now, last year, AIPAC ranked 15th in total expenditure by a political action committee, according to data collected by Open Secrets. But take a look at the other funders that AIPAC is competing against for that title. Act Blue and Win Red. They are Democratic and Republican Party machines. Save America is Donald Trump's money-raising operation. The Conservative Club for Growth, Emily's List, focuses on electing Democratic women to office. All of the PACs on this list are massively domestic-focused ideological machines. AIPAC is the only organization in the top 20 whose interests are focused entirely on America's relationship to a foreign government. Now, let's take a look at who benefits from AIPAC's largesse. Here are the top 20 recipients in Congress, the House and the Senate, of AIPAC money in the 2022 midterm cycle, according to Open Secrets. They're members of both parties. They come from every corner of the country with varying levels of experience in Congress. The Democrat Glenn Ivey of Maryland tops the list. He beat out fellow Democrat Donna Edwards in Maryland's House primary after AIPAC poured millions into pro-Ivey advertisements and mailers. Edwards was running for a second stint in Congress after serving during the Obama administration, where she voted present, not even a no, on a number of pro-Israel resolutions. So the money poured in against her. Not even an endorsement from Nancy Pelosi could save her. Michigan Democrat Haley Stevens unseated Democratic Representative Andy Levin. Here's what Levin had to say about that.
I'm really Jewish, but AIPAC can't stand the idea that I am the clearest, strongest Jewish voice in Congress, standing for a simple proposition that there's no way to have a secure democratic homeland for the Jewish people unless we achieve the political and human rights of the Palestinian people.
AIPAC spent $4 million against Levin. He lost by 20 points. When Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, was censured by the House in early November over what some lawmakers called her rhetoric around the Israeli-Hamas war, 22 Democrats joined Republicans in that censure vote. 18 of those Democrats received campaign funds from AIPAC in 2022, totaling more than $1.1 million. By the way, for these 6 of them, AIPAC was their top contributor. A growing list of progressive lawmakers who are vocal in their criticism of the government of Israel and its policies and their support for Palestinian self-determination have inspired AIPAC to spend even more. As progressive lawmakers began calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, Slate reported that insiders expect AIPAC's 2024 spending to hit $100 million. In fact, United Democracy Project, which is a pro-Israel super PAC affiliated with AIPAC, is already spending money on attack ads against Democratic Representatives Jamal Bowman of New York and Summer Lee of Pennsylvania. Lee has already got a primary challenger, as do Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar. Pro-Israel donors have already signaled that they are eager to primary Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Congresswoman Lee already overcame AIPAC's financial influence against her once. She tweeted criticisms of Israel's treatment of Palestinians in 2021, but as a candidate, she affirmed Israel's right to exist. But that's not good enough. AIPAC spent nearly $3 million in the primary alone to defeat Lee, and they almost did. She beat Stephen Irwin, who is third on the list of money given to candidates by AIPAC in 2022, by less than 1,000 votes. And if Congresswoman Lee wants to keep her seat in 2024, she's going to have to do it all over again. She joins me in studio after this break.
I mean, it's amazing that MSNBC even came out with this. It's amazing that they put this out there to expose AIPAC. This is a very powerful foreign law. Why it's not registered as a foreign lobby, I don't know. It's considered an American lobby, but it's Americans who are for a foreign country. And then they're lobbying all of our politicians on behalf of this other foreign country. They're claiming that and then they say, by the way, that if you even dare assert that any of these Americans who are supporting AIPAC, which is putting Israel, lobbying for Israel, if you dare assert that they might not be so fully committed to America, you're an anti-Semite. If you at all try to claim that they put Israel first, you're an anti-Semite, even though they are literally lobbying on behalf of a foreign country to our American politicians. Make it make sense. You're clearly really interested in this foreign country and willing to lobby against Americans, essentially, in order to gain for this foreign country. That is the epitome of having dual loyalty. And that's the epitome of, well, treason in so many cases. This is just absolutely outrageous. Shouldn't be allowed at all. They need to be registered as a foreign agent. So it's incredible that MSNBC even put this out. It's incredible. But the thing is about what they're saying. So they're saying Democratic candidates. Let's break this down a bit, because AIPAC says 100% of our Democratic endorsed politicians win. 100%. Why would that be? Why is it Republicans like Thomas Massie are able to just basically give AIPAC the bird and still win by a wide margin, and Democrats are being defeated over and over and over again once AIPAC comes after them? Well, interestingly, even though Republicans have tended in their voting stances to be more pro-Israel, the Jewish population is more Democrat, voting historically Democrat, registered as Democrat. So there is a possibility that a large chunk of the voting base, the Jewish voting base, that is the ones that are very supportive of Israel, would then vote on that one issue. They become one issue voters. And well, really, because they're primarying these people, so they don't care. They're like, okay, we agree on all these other policies that are Democratic policies that we like, but on this one issue, we are Israel. You're not. You're America. We're for Israel, and so we're going to vote for you. That it's possible that is why Democrats have more to fear when it comes to AIPAC's lobbying against them than Republicans. I think a lot more Republicans right now are America first. They want to put America first. They don't care about Israel, but a lot of Democrats, they're not even there on domestic policy, America first so much. They don't have that type of mentality inside of the Democratic Party. So maybe that's why AIPAC is able to handily defeat them. I do want to move on to this next story that Ryan Grimm has been doing some really, really great reporting on the hero doctor who's been trapped in Gaza. He did release this scathing letter. Let me just read for you Ryan's tweet. He says, powerful statement issued yesterday by Dr. Adam Hamaway, who refused to be evacuated from Gaza until a new rotation of medical workers are allowed in by the IDF. Two sources tell me the IDF has agreed to allow them in, but we'll follow up and we'll see what happens. Now, here is the letter from the doctor. Let me read this to you. This is scathing. Now, this doctor was the one who saved Senator Tammy Duckworth when she was in battle. He's a battlefront doctor, real hero. He says, as a U.S. Army combat surgeon, veteran, and international crisis first responder, I have built my life on service and the belief in the U.S. government. I took a Hippocratic oath to help people, whoever they are, wherever they are, when the call came in December of 2023 that doctors were needed through the World Health Organization, and being specialized in combat trauma and reconstructive surgery, I signed up to serve. I have never in my career witnessed the level of atrocities and targeting of my medical colleagues as I have in Gaza. So here's a doctor who's been serving in combat for decades, and he's saying he has never in his entire career as a combat doc seen the level of atrocities and targeting, and yet Israel is the most moral military in the world. They don't dare target civilians. And what are you talking about? He says, I arrived in Rafah as part of a team coordinated by the WHO. We understood the dire conditions and planned to leave together in 2 weeks. On May 13th, in violation of international law, our team of medical professionals were denied exit. I want our president to know that we are not safe. When the call came to evacuate, I was asked to choose to either evacuate and leave my team behind or stay with them. I could not in good conscience leave my team behind. That was not what I was taught. That is not the soldier's creed. We don't leave Americans behind. This is against our values as Americans. This letter makes me sick. I mean, he says, I want our president to know that we are not safe. He says, as a doctor, sorry guys, this is just disgusting. It's disgusting. And it's so disgusting that guys like Lindsey Graham are out there, Israel, everything for Israel. And we have heroes in Gaza, and the IDF is treating them this way. The IDF is blocking them from exit. The IDF won't let new medics in. He says this is the most atrocities he's ever experienced. I mean, how can you not get emotional over this and understand that this is a horrific, dire situation and disgusting, and we have been bought off and sold. And America needs to be aware of this. As a doctor, I cannot abandon the remaining members of my team. And as a former soldier, I cannot abandon my fellow Americans. God. Fucking Biden. Honestly, sorry guys, this is just outrageous. This is outrageous. I can't even finish it. He's got a wife and kids, and he's stuck. He might not come home at all. I can't imagine with the level of attention he's getting. Well, somewhat. I mean, we're not hearing about him all over the mainstream news that much, but I would hope the IDF would do everything in their power to ensure that this man gets out alive. That's what I would hope, but they haven't shown to be reliable on that front. They've certainly not cared about a lot of other people who didn't have these high profile events or names or even American citizenship. They've just shown to not care. And our government has just been completely bought off. I don't know how else to frame it anymore. I don't know how else to think of it anymore, except that our country is no longer our own. And we have to become more aware of this and understand that something went very wrong somewhere along the line, somewhere where this was allowed to go very wrong. Money and greed is the root of all the evil. And it seems like these politicians just soaked up all the money and greed. And there are people in high positions of power in this country who are extremely pro-Israel. And somewhere along the line, it was a very brilliant strategy on Israel's part. You got to give it to them. Smart. Got to give it to them. You know, if you're Israel and you're looking out for your interests at all costs, they have done some seriously smart work, haven't they? They figured it out. They looked at America. They saw our system. They were like, oh, okay, so you could just basically buy the politicians. You could pretty much, you know, if you get into positions of power and more money, then you have the money to buy off the politicians. So let's make sure that we choose industries that are going to make a lot of money, get good at those industries, rise to the top of those industries, to command those industries, make a ton of cash, and use that money to lobby the government, use that money to influence in the ways that we want. I come from Vietnamese refugees. They chose nail salons. Wasn't the most powerful or money-making industry in the world, but they dominated that industry, didn't they? So, you know, this is how they've done it. They figured it out, and Americans need to be aware of this. Americans need to understand that this is what's happened, and that there's a lot of people in a lot of positions of power, from our government, our administration, to just powerful industries, to just billionaires, who are able to influence policy and get everything they want for a different country other than America. We have to somehow take that back. I don't know how we go about doing that. I would love to hear from you how we go about doing that. He goes on to say that this burden falls on the international community and President Biden to use their full influence to ensure medical personnel can continue their critical work without being put in harm's way. We worry that the European hospital where we currently are in will suffer a similar fate of Al-Shifa and Nasser hospitals, where humanitarian workers, patients, and civilians were massacred. As for our patients, it is with very heavy heart that we will ultimately leave them behind without care. And this responsibility remains in the hands of the international community. We entered with a commitment to be relieved with another medical team, and now this too is being denied. The people of Gaza deserve more than their burnt out, collapsed healthcare system. And then he says, to my wife, daughters, and son, I know it hurts that I'm not coming home this weekend, and I'm sorry, but I know that you are proud that I am upholding my oath to never leave anyone behind. Gosh, why is our country like this? Well, we all know greed, money. They're able to buy us off. We're easy to be bought. We're easy to be manipulated, I guess. And so that's what's happened. That's exactly what's happened. Okay, we're going to end the show, but we are going to end it on a funny note, because that was just too sad, right? That was just too sad, guys. And we can't end it like that. We just can't. So we're going to end it with Joe Biden. I don't know what to make of this, but you guys go ahead and listen for yourself. And his latest gaffe, his latest advice for young men on who they should marry. Watch this.
Like my deceased father-in-law, as we say in the Catholic Church, no purgatory for this guy. 5 daughters. Straight to heaven. And by the way, I say to every young man thinking of getting married, marrying a family of 5 or more daughters. I did. My wife's the oldest of 5 sisters. You know why? One of them will always love you. Not the same one. One of them will always be on your side. That's the biggest advantage of marrying into 5 daughters.
What? I mean, was he being serious there? Like, one of the girls will love you at all times? I mean, what in the world kind of weird advice is this? Marry into a family with 5 daughters because one of them will always love you? So is he saying that sometimes Jill didn't love him, but one of the sisters did? And in what way exactly, Joe Biden? I don't know, guys. Absolutely bizarro comment. Another bizarro comment from Joe Biden, right? I mean, just totally weird, totally bizarre. I don't know what to think of him. Anyway, got to end it on a laugh, guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here.